I am 95 years old. In my long life, I have seen the stock market go up and down. I have seen crashes. I have seen war, peace, prices going up too fast, and really bad economic problems. I have learned one important thing. The stock market doesn't care about your feelings. It doesn't care about politics. It only cares about two things: how strong businesses really are and whether people trust them. You know, I don't like to talk about Washington. That's not what I do. I like businesses. I like numbers. I like honest and skilled leaders. But sometimes what happens in Washington stops being just politics. It becomes a danger to the whole system. It threatens the strength of businesses, and it destroys trust. And today, I must break my rule, because something has happened that I think most Americans, even most people who study Wall Street, have missed. Everyone is talking about August 2025. They talk about the court hearing in New York. They talk about how the $454 million fine against Donald Trump was canceled. The news media covered that story. His supporters celebrated, and his opponents were disappointed. But all of them missed the real story. They missed the trick. You see, while everyone was focused on the $454 million number, something far more dangerous was hidden in that ruling. Yes, the court said the money fine was too much, but they did not reverse the main judgment. They did not say there was no fraud. Instead, they did something I've never seen in my business career. They approved and expanded a system of monitoring. But this is not normal watching. This isn't an accountant checking the books. No. The court gave state-appointed monitors powers that have basically taken away Trump's control over his own empire. This is no longer a fine. This is a takeover. A quiet legal takeover hidden by the winning headline about a dismissed fine. The court basically handed the government the keys to the Trump organization. They said, "You don't have to pay, but we will take control." Think about that. The United States government through a state court now has the power to say no to business deals, to hire and fire workers, to sell off property of a private business. And not just any business. The business owned by the current president of the United States. This connection, this conflict of interest, it is not just a warning sign. It is a huge hurricane forming just off the coast, and everyone is still relaxing on the beach. Now, why would the court do this? Why would they take such an unusual, almost never seen before step? The media got so distracted by the dollar amount, they forgot to read the small details that are leaders I can trust. I have said for 50 years that I would rather have a wonderful business at a fair price than a fair business at a wonderful price. But the one thing I will not do is go into business with people I don't trust. If I find out a CEO has been lying in the books, if I find out they've been lying to their banks, I don't walk away. I run. What the New York court system has said very clearly is that the man running the United States of America cannot be trusted not to commit fraud. Again, think about the message that sends. This isn't a political enemy throwing insults. This is a finding of fact by a court of law that was kept in place on appeal. The court has basically placed the president's personal business under legal supervision. They have created a wall not to protect the president from his business, but to protect the public from the president's business practices. This is unknown territory, and this is where the real trouble begins. This is where the political chaos starts to leak into the economic basics. You see, this August 2025 ruling creates a problem with the structure that we have never had to deal with before. It creates a level of deep, basic uncertainty. And as I've told you, markets can handle bad news. They can't handle uncertainty. What are the rules now? If the president in his official job makes a decision on trade policy that helps one of his properties, who can stop it? If he talks with a foreign leader and that foreign leader offers a good deal on a new hotel project, is that a personal deal or a government deal? We always had to worry about the appearance of a conflict of interest. Now, we are dealing with a legally declared fact of lying behavior at the center of government. The court-appointed monitors are watching his business. But who is watching the country? And this is where the weakness I mentioned, the weakness beneath all the loud talk, truly begins to show. This New York judgment isn't happening alone. It's happening at the same time that the president is facing many life-changing legal battles in other places. Battles that aren't just about money or business control, but about his personal freedom. People need to understand what this costs, not just in dollars, but in time and focus. Campaign finance reports have shown something that, as an investor, I find shocking. Trump's legal defense groups have spent more than $100 million in lawyer fees since 2023. $100 million. Now, when I see a company spending $100 million on legal defense, I ask myself, what else could that money have been used for? Making products, paying back loans, returning value to owners. In this case, that's $100 million that could have gone to campaign work, to policy creation, to efforts to get people to vote. Instead, it's being fed into a black hole of legal fees. And let me tell you about legal defense spending. You can't predict when it will end. Every motion, every appeal, every day in court, it just uses up money. Partner-level lawyers at major firms can charge $1,000, $1,500, $2,000 an hour. Multiply that across many cases, and you see how you get to $100 million. But it's not the money that worries me most. It's the focus. When you are fighting a legal battle on this many fronts, that is what you are thinking about. That is what takes up your attention. Not inflation, not foreign trade, not the stability of the bond market. And this brings us to Georgia. If you thought the New York fraud case was serious, what is happening in Georgia is on another level. This is criminal, truly criminal charges that could send a former and current president to prison. I do not say that lightly. Trump faces charges under the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, RICO. Now, RICO was designed to go after organized crime, the mafia. It's a tool to break down criminal groups. And now it's being used against a sitting president and 18 other people charged with him, saying there was a plan to overturn the 2020 election results. If convicted, Trump could face up to 20 years in prison. 20 years for a man in his late 70s, that is a life sentence. This is what is taking up his mind. This is the biggest distraction. And that kind of distraction at the top creates an empty space that markets and our enemies will always take advantage of. And this is where the real-world cost of this chaos begins to appear. It's not just about the president's personal legal troubles anymore. It's about how those troubles and his fighting style are now causing a kind of shutdown of the institutions. What we are seeing now, something I haven't seen in my 95 years to this degree, is widespread institutional resistance. I'm talking about the courts, the federal agencies, even state governments. They are all in their own way pushing back against this administration. Let me give you some specifics, because the details matter. Just this month, November 2025, a federal judge in Oregon, blocked the president's order to send National Guard troops to Portland for riot control. The judge didn't just disagree with the policy, he ruled it unconstitutional. Think about that. The commander-in-chief gives an order, and a federal court says, "No, you cannot do that. It breaks the Constitution." This isn't a single incident. Across the country, courts have stopped or delayed dozens of executive orders on everything from immigration to energy policy. In fact, a watchdog organization, Just Security, is tracking this. They report that the administration is currently involved in over 500 active legal challenges to its own policies. 500. That is not a mistake. Of those, about 30 executive orders have been fully blocked, completely stopped, and more than 250 are just stuck in legal limbo, waiting for a final ruling. Now, from a business viewpoint, imagine you were trying to run a company, any company, Berkshire Hathaway, for example. What if 500 of my decisions as CEO were being challenged in court? What if 30 of them were completely blocked by judges and another 250 were just hanging there creating uncertainty? How could I run the company? How could I make plans? How could I carry out a long-term strategy? The answer is you couldn't. Not well. It would be total chaos. And that is exactly what is happening to the business of our government right now. This level of court fighting, analysts are saying it's unmatched since the Nixon administration 50 years ago. This tells you something deep. The courts aren't just disagreeing with policy choices. They are saying you are going beyond your constitutional power. You are breaking the rules. They are pushing back because the trust at the very top, the trust that was legally destroyed in that New York courtroom, is gone. But let me tell you what truly keeps me up at night. It's not just the lawyers and the judges and the policy experts in Washington. It's when this chaos, this system failure starts to break out of the courtroom and hit ordinary Americans in their homes. And that is exactly what is happening right now. The human and economic effects of these chaotic policies are becoming scarily visible. Real people are being hurt. Real communities are suffering. Just last week, in the same month of November 2025, the U.S. Supreme Court allowed the administration to block $4 billion in federal food aid money under the SNAP program. That's what most people call food stamps. $4 billion. Gone just like that. This action is set to temporarily affect about 42 million low-income Americans. 42 million. Let me say that again. 42 million Americans suddenly facing food insecurity because of a budget standoff. Now, the administration defended this. They said, "We're in the middle of a government funding crisis. We have to make tough choices. And listen, I understand being responsible with money more than anyone. I have spent my entire career thinking about using money well, about not wasting a single dollar. But here's what the economists are warning. This move will make food insecurity worse, and it will reduce spending by consumers in low-income communities. You see, when you cut SNAP benefits, those families don't just go hungry, though that's bad enough. They also stop spending money on other things. They cut back on clothing, on transportation, on the small purchases that keep local businesses alive. That $4 billion in SNAP benefits ripples through the economy. It supports grocery stores, farmers, food distributors, local shops. When you pull that money out of the system, you're not just hurting those 42 million people directly. You are hurting their communities. You are hurting the businesses that serve them. You are creating a negative multiplier effect that spreads through the entire economy. And that is just one decision made in an environment of chaos. It's a reactive, desperate move, not a sound long-term policy. It's what happens when the people in charge are distracted by 500 lawsuits and the threat of a 20-year prison sentence. The ship has no captain, and the passengers, well, the passengers are starting to be thrown overboard. And as if that weren't enough, that's just one policy fire. Let me tell you about another one that has me deeply worried. This administration's renewed aggressive push for a universal 10% tariff on all imported goods. Now, I have been doubtful of tariffs for my entire 70-plus year career, and I'll tell you why. Because tariffs are just taxes. That's all they are. They are a tax on imported goods. And who pays those taxes? The politicians stand up and they say, "We're making China pay. We're making Mexico pay." But that's not how it works. The foreign companies don't pay the tax. The American consumer pays the tax. You and me. Every person who buys anything that's imported, a car, a television, clothes, food, you pay the price. The Peterson Institute for International Economics, and these are serious nonpartisan economists, they just look at the numbers. They've done the analysis on this. They estimate that these tariffs, if fully put in place, could cost the average American household about $1,500 per year. $1,500 per year. Now, that's not some abstract number. For most American families, $1,500 is real money. That's a vacation you can't take. That's a car payment or several. That's groceries for months. It's a direct hit to the spending power of every family in this country. But it gets worse. It always gets worse when you start these things. These tariffs aren't just raising prices for you and me. They are badly straining our trade relations with our most important partners, China, Mexico, the European Union. These are our biggest trading partners. And when you just slap a 10% tax on everything coming from these countries, they don't just sit there and accept it. They fight back. They put tariffs on American exports. What does that mean? It means our American farmers can't sell their soybeans to China as easily. It means American manufacturers can't export their machinery to Europe as competitively. Jobs get lost here. Industries suffer here. I've always believed that trade, when it's done right, is a game where both sides win. Both sides benefit. You specialize in what you're good at. I specialize in what I'm good at. We trade, and we are both better off. That's basic economics. That's Adam Smith from 250 years ago. But these universal tariffs, they are the opposite thinking. They assume trade is a game where if one person wins, the other must lose. That is just not how the modern connected global economy works. It's a blunt tool from a past era, and it's an act of economic self-harm. So now, let's just step back and look at the picture we have painted. You have 42 million Americans suddenly facing food insecurity. You have the average household facing a new $1,500 tax bill thanks to tariffs. You have strained trade relations with our biggest partners who are now fighting back against our farmers and manufacturers. And all of this is happening while the federal government is tied in knots, fighting over 500 active legal challenges with a chief executive who is at the same time battling a state-level fraud judgment and a 20-year prison sentence in Georgia. This is what I mean when I say Donald Trump is in deeper trouble than anyone expected. It's not just legal trouble, though that is serious. It's not just political trouble. It is system-wide trouble. It's the kind of trouble that affects real people, real communities, and real economic outcomes. And here's what keeps me up at night. All of this is happening at the same time. These aren't problems in a row where you solve one and move to the next. They're all happening at once, creating a level of chaos and uncertainty that makes good governing and sound economic management nearly impossible. This is why I'm speaking up now. This is why, as you might know, I broke my own rule back in May of 2025. I stood up at the Berkshire Hathaway annual shareholders meeting, 40,000 people in that arena in Omaha looking for guidance. And I told them something I do not say lightly. I told them that these steep universal tariffs we are putting in place are an economic act of self-harm. Self-harm. Those were my exact words, because that's what they are. You see, trade should be a bridge, not a weapon. When you close your doors, when you throw up barriers and say, "We don't want your goods," you pay the price inside your own house. You really do. Your consumers pay more. Your businesses lose access to materials and parts. Your exporters face fightback from other countries. It's economic suicide dressed up as nationalism. And I'm not alone in this opinion. Major financial organizations, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, organizations that have studied global trade for decades are all saying the same thing. They've warned that increasing these trade barriers could cut global GDP growth by about 1.5% over the next 2 years. 1.5% might not sound like much, but on a global economy of $100 trillion, that's $1.5 trillion in lost economic output. That's millions of jobs. That's innovation that doesn't happen. And for what? for the false sense of protection. Now, my concern goes beyond tariffs. It really does. In my 2025 shareholder letter, and I spent a lot of time on that letter, trying to be clear, trying to be helpful, I stressed the importance of dollar stability and careful spending. Here's what I wrote, and I want you to really think about these words. Reckless money policy can destroy even the strongest nation's savings. That is not exaggeration. That is history. We have seen it happen in Germany in the 1920s. We've seen it in Zimbabwe. We've seen it in Venezuela. When you print too much money, when you borrow without control, when you treat your nation's currency like play money, eventually people lose faith. And once faith is lost in a currency, it is very difficult to get it back. The dollar's strength, its status as the world's reserve currency, it isn't automatic. It's not a birthright. It is earned. It's kept through responsible money policy, through believable institutions, through the simple belief around the world that the United States government pays its debts and manages its money wisely. But what are we doing right now? We are testing those beliefs. We are pushing the boundaries of money responsibility in ways that make me, as an investor and as a citizen, deeply uncomfortable. Here's what concerns me right now. Today, the current administration has proposed a new $1.5 trillion infrastructure plan. Now, look, infrastructure investment can be a good thing. I am not against building roads and bridges, but this plan relies heavily on deficit financing and expanded Treasury borrowing. Let me translate that for you. It means we are going to borrow $1 trillion, $500 billion, money we do not have, and spend it on infrastructure. And who is going to pay that back? Future taxpayers, our children and our grandchildren. Now, sometimes deficit spending makes sense. In a deep recession, when private demand collapses, government spending can fill the gap. That's basic economics 101. But we are not in a deep recession right now. Unemployment is relatively low. The economy is, by most measures, growing. This isn't helping during a downturn. This is just spending money we don't have because we want things and we don't want to raise taxes to pay for them. The Congressional Budget Office, and these are the government's own accountants, they are nonpartisan. They predict that if these money practices continue, the U.S. national debt could jump from $34 trillion in 2024 to $38 trillion by 2028. $4 trillion in additional debt in just 4 years. That's $1 trillion per year roughly added to the pile. And this is where the real danger begins. Now, what happens when your debt grows that fast? What is the real-world result of adding $1 trillion in debt every single year? Well, two things mainly, and they both affect you directly. First, you increase inflation pressures. When the government borrows money on this huge scale, it competes with private borrowers for available money. It competes with you trying to get a mortgage, with a small business trying to get a loan to expand. That pushes interest rates up for everyone. And higher interest rates mean more expensive mortgages, more expensive car loans, more expensive business loans. Economic growth, the engine of our success, begins to slow down. Second, and in the long run, perhaps even more dangerously, you hurt investor confidence. Now, who are these investors? A lot of them are foreign governments, China, Japan, European nations. They hold trillions of dollars of U.S. debt. They have been willing to lend us all this money at very low interest rates for decades for one simple reason. They trusted us. They believed U.S. debt was the safest investment in the world, as good as gold. But if our debt keeps exploding, if we show no money discipline, no plan to ever get this under control, well, at some point that trust begins to shake. At some point, they start asking for higher interest rates to pay them back for the new risk, the risk that we're just a nation of spenders who can't control ourselves. And that is when the bad cycle begins. Those higher interest rates demanded by nervous investors make our huge $38 trillion debt problem even more expensive to manage. That added interest cost blows an even bigger hole in our budget, which means we have to borrow even more money, which makes investors even more nervous, and the whole thing spirals. It's a debt trap. Now, I didn't mention Mr. Trump by name in my shareholder letter or in my public comments. I try not to make these things personal. But let's be honest, everyone understood exactly what I was talking about. The media coverage made that clear. Buffett criticizes Trump's economic policies. Buffett warns about money recklessness. The headlines wrote themselves. And look, I'm not trying to embarrass anyone, and I'm not trying to score political points, but I do think I have a responsibility. We all have a responsibility to speak honestly about economic reality. And here's the reality. Here is the simple economic reality. You cannot run an economy. You cannot run the United States of America the way you run a highly leveraged real estate business. You just can't. In real estate, if a deal goes bad, you have options. You can declare bankruptcy. You can restructure your debt, hand the keys back to the bank, and move on to the next project. I've seen Mr. Trump do that multiple times over his career with his casinos and hotels. It's a tool in the toolbox for that specific industry. But you can't bankrupt a country. Not really. When a nation's money collapses, it's not a clean process. Real people suffer. Savings carefully built over a lifetime disappear. Jobs disappear overnight. Social services, the safety net for the most vulnerable, they fall apart. It's not like a business bankruptcy where you just talk with your creditors in a comfortable conference room. It's retired people who can't afford food. It's families losing their homes. It's genuine widespread human misery. And that is why I'm speaking up now. Not because I have partisan political goals. I don't. Not because I dislike Mr. Trump personally. I barely know the man. I am speaking up because I have studied economic history. I understand how nations build wealth, and I understand all too well how they destroy it. And what I am seeing right now, this combination of reckless trade policy, this unsustainable deficit spending, and this mounting all-consuming legal chaos, it creates a perfect storm of economic uncertainty. And this path, the path we are on right now, it is not the path toward building wealth. It is a path toward the latter. Markets can tolerate a lot of things. They can tolerate policy disagreements. They can tolerate political drama to a point. But they cannot tolerate basic existential uncertainty about whether the people in charge understand or even respect basic economic principles. And right now that uncertainty is growing every single day. You can see it in the volatility measures. You can see it in the money flows. And you can see it in the way serious institutional investors are positioning their portfolios more defensively, more conservatively, with more protections against potential instability. That's not normal. That's not how markets should behave when the economy is supposedly strong. It tells you that beneath the surface, people are worried, really worried, and they should be. Now, you can have all the political theories you want. You can debate legal principles and constitutional questions until you're exhausted. But there is one thing that cuts through all the noise, all the spin, all the talk. The market. The market doesn't care about your talking points. It doesn't care about your political party. It cares about one thing and one thing only, reality. And right now, the market is telling us something very, very clear. The markets have already begun to respond to these developments, and not in a good way. Following Mr. Trump's announcement of expanded tariffs back in mid-2025, when he doubled down on that universal 10% tariff idea and started talking about even higher rates for certain countries, the Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 3.7% in a single trading day. One day, 3.7%. Now, let me put that in perspective for you, because percentages can feel abstract. That single day drop wiped out roughly $1.2 trillion in market value. $1.2 trillion. That's not just numbers on a screen. That is retirement accounts. That's pension funds. That's the nest eggs of millions of ordinary Americans who worked hard, saved carefully, and trust that their investments will be there when they need them. And it disappeared in one day. Why? Because of policy uncertainty. You see, markets hate uncertainty more than they hate bad news. Bad news you can price in, you can plan for. If you tell me a company is going to have a bad quarter, I can adjust my valuation. But uncertainty means you don't know what's coming next. You don't know if tariffs will be 10% or 25%. You don't know if trade deals will be renegotiated or torn up completely. You don't know if the legal system will work normally or if we're heading into a constitutional crisis. And when investors don't know what's coming, they do one thing. They pull back. They get defensive. They move money into safer assets. Cash, gold, short-term bonds. And when that happens on a huge scale, markets fall, companies lose value, and economic growth slows. That is exactly what we are seeing. But folks, it's not just domestic investors who are worried. It's not just American pension funds or Wall Street money managers. Something far more alarming is happening in the global money flows. And this is the number that I want you to really remember. According to the Treasury Department's own data, this is the government's own numbers. Foreign investment in U.S. Treasury bonds declined by nearly 6% in the third quarter of 2025. 6% in one quarter. Now, why does that matter? Why is a 6% drop in bond purchases potentially much scarier than a 3.7% drop in the Dow? Because of this. For decades, foreign investors, particularly foreign governments, have been the backbone of U.S. debt financing. China, Japan, European nations, oil-rich Middle Eastern countries, they all hold enormous amounts of U.S. Treasury bonds. They have been willing to lend us trillions of dollars at relatively low interest rates for one simple reason. They viewed U.S. debt as the safest investment in the world. It was the risk-free asset. It was where everyone put their money when they were scared of everything else. A 6% decline in one quarter. That is not normal change. That is a statement. That is a warning shot. That is foreign investors saying, we're not so sure anymore. We're getting cautious. And once that caution takes hold, once the perception shifts from U.S. debt is risk-free to U.S. debt carries political and money risk, well, that's when things can spiral very quickly. That's when the bad cycle I warned about begins. Interest rates rise, borrowing costs increase. The debt burden becomes more expensive to manage. And remember, we're already talking about debt going from $34 trillion to $38 trillion. Now, add higher interest rates on top of that, and the numbers become genuinely frightening. My remarks throughout 2025, and I've tried to be measured, I really have, they've reflected this broader sense of worry that you now see on Wall Street and beyond. I am not the only one saying these things. CEOs are saying them in private. Fund managers are positioning their portfolios defensively. Economists are publishing warnings. But because of my position, because of Berkshire's track record, when I speak, people tend to listen. And I take that responsibility seriously, which is why I have been as clear as I can be without crossing that line into partisan politics. What we are seeing is dangerous. The combination of legal chaos, policy uncertainty, and this money recklessness creates conditions that can destabilize even the strongest economy. Mr. Trump's current situation, therefore, is not just a matter of legal danger, though he is certainly facing that. With the Georgia RICO case, the federal investigations, the New York fraud judgment, the danger is huge. And it's not just partisan conflict, though there is plenty of that to go around. No, what we are seeing is something deeper. It's a collision. It's a collision between political power and institutional accountability. It's a test of whether our system of checks and balances, a system that has served this country well for over 200 years, can work when someone pushes against every boundary, challenges every norm, and fights every limit. And at the same time, we are seeing another collision. A collision between popular economic talk and long-term money stability. You can talk all you want about bringing jobs back and making America great again and standing up to China, but if your policies, the actual real-world results, if they increase consumer prices, if they blow up the deficit, if they destabilize trade relationships, and if they scare the very investors who fund our nation's debt, well, the talk doesn't matter much. The reality does, and reality always wins in the end. My response to all this, and I say this not to promote myself, but to explain my thinking, my response is rooted in principles I have held my entire career, principles of financial discipline, free trade, and steady governing. These are not radical ideas. They're not particularly left-wing or right-wing. They are just sound. They are what works over the long term. Financial discipline. That simply means you don't spend vastly more than you take in year after year after year without any clear plan to ever address it. It's what you'd teach your children. It's what you'd expect from any well-run business. And it's what we should demand from our government. Free trade. That simply means you recognize that specialization and exchange create wealth for all parties. It's the understanding that, as I've said before, trade is a game where both sides win. You specialize in what you're good at. I specialize in what I'm good at. We trade and we are both better off. It's not a game where if China wins, we lose. That's a 19th century view of a 21st century economy. And steady governing. That means you have predictable rules. It means you have working institutions, and it means you have leaders who respect constitutional limits and the rule of law. It's the foundation of trust. It's what allows a business to make a 20-year investment, knowing the rules won't just be changed overnight on a whim. Mr. Trump's fighting approach to both economics and law violates all three of these core principles. The money recklessness, the $38 trillion debt projection, violates financial discipline. The 10% universal tariffs, the trade wars, that violates the principles of free trade, and the 500 lawsuits, the battling with the courts, the finding of fraud, that destroys the very idea of steady governing. And that is why I am concerned, not because I have political objections to him. Politics, as I've said, is not really my area. I am concerned because I can see where this leads economically, and it is not to a good place. It is a path we've seen other nations go down, and it never ever ends well. Now, I am not naive. I understand that Mr. Trump remains a powerful political figure. I see his base of support. I see his ability to dominate media coverage and his skill at political fighting. But that's not what I'm looking at. I'm looking at the numbers. I'm looking at the fallout, his mounting legal exposure, the constant policy pushback from the courts, and the deep economic trouble he is actively creating. All of this has produced an environment of uncertainty not seen in the United States since the early 1970s. Now think about that. The early 1970s, that was 50-plus years ago. Most people working on Wall Street today, most people running companies, they weren't even alive then. But those of us who lived through it, we remember. I remember. We remember what it felt like. Watergate, Nixon's resignation, the oil shock, stagflation. That feeling when institutions themselves seemed to be under stress, when trust in government had completely collapsed, and when economic policies seemed lost, jumping from one crisis to the next. And I have to tell you, I am getting that same feeling now. That same sense that we are sailing into unknown waters, but this time without a reliable compass, without experienced navigators, and without the institutional strength to keep the ship steady. And the The markets are already pricing in that uncertainty. That $1.2 trillion single-day loss I mentioned. That's just the beginning. That 6% decline in foreign treasury purchases, that is a deep warning shot. These are the early signs. These are the tremors before the earthquake. They signal a potential loss of confidence that could cascade very quickly into something much more serious. I don't want to be an alarmist. I have never been an alarmist in my entire career. I have been relentlessly optimistic about America's long-term future. Our economy is strong. Our people are innovative. Our institutions have weathered terrible storms before, but strength has limits. Innovation needs stable conditions to grow, and institutions can only bend so far before they break. We are testing those limits right now, and the results of that test will determine not just Mr. Trump's fate, not just the political landscape of the next few years, but the economic path of this country for decades to come. So when people ask me, Warren, what should we do? I tell them what I always tell them. Focus on basics. Invest in quality businesses with strong management and lasting advantages. Keep cash reserves for opportunities that come during trouble. And most importantly, don't panic. But I'm adding a new piece of advice this time. I am also telling them to pay attention because what is happening now is not normal. And pretending it is, pretending that this mounting legal chaos, this money recklessness, this policy instability, pretending that this is just business as usual or politics as usual, that would be the biggest mistake of all. This brings me to my final warning. It's about the weakness beneath the loud talk. So here we are. As 2025 draws to a close, I find myself thinking about where we stand as a nation. And I have got to tell you, Donald Trump's situation, and by extension, the country's situation appears far more fragile than many people realize. Far more fragile. You see, when you're inside the storm, when you're caught up in the daily headlines, the legal motions, the political drama, it's very easy to miss the bigger picture. It's easy to think, well, he survived scandals before. He'll find a way to survive this, too. And maybe he will politically. Maybe his base will stick with him. Maybe he'll find a way to fight through these legal challenges. But that's not really the point, is it? The point is this. His legal problems continue to grow, not shrink. The Georgia RICO charges, the federal investigations, the 500 active legal challenges to his policies, the 30 executive orders that are completely blocked by the courts. The courts are pushing back everywhere you look. That is not sustainable. You cannot govern a country well when you are fighting your own court system on 500 different fronts at the same time. And his policy decisions, they face resistance not just from political opponents, though there's plenty of that, but from the institutions themselves. Federal judges, state governments, even reportedly members of his own administration are saying, wait, this doesn't work. This isn't legal. This breaks the Constitution. That is institutional pushback of a kind we have not seen in half a century. And his economic strategies, the tariffs, the deficit spending, they are attracting sharp public criticism from the financial world's most respected voices. As I said, I've spoken up, but I'm not alone. The IMF, the World Bank, major investment firms, economists from across the entire political spectrum, they are all warning about the same things. Tariffs as self-harm, deficit, spending spiraling out of control, trade relationships getting worse, market instability increasing. My commentary, and I've tried to keep it measured, tried to keep it focused on principles rather than personalities, it serves as a mirror to the current reality. And that reality is this. Markets respond not to slogans. They don't respond to make America great again, or America first, or any other catchphrase. They respond to basics. They respond to trust, stability, and transparency. Trust that contracts will be honored. Stability in policy and governing. Transparency in financial dealings and decision-making. And right now, because of that August 2025 ruling and everything that has followed, all three of those pillars are shaking. Trust is wearing away as the legal judgments pile up, and that core finding of fraud stands unreversed. Stability is disappearing as courts block policies, and legal chaos dominates every news cycle. And transparency. Transparency is completely absent when you have court-appointed monitors watching a sitting president's business empire, because the judges do not trust him not to commit fraud. If Mr. Trump fails to restore these pillars, and frankly, given the path we are on, I am not optimistic that he can, then his greatest challenge may not come from prosecutors or political opponents. It won't be Fulton County, or the special counsel, or Democratic resistance in Congress, and his greatest challenge will come from something much more powerful and much more unforgiving. It will come from the gradual, silent, and devastating loss of global confidence in America's economic leadership. That is what keeps me up at night. Not Trump personally, not the politics of it all, but the system-wide risk. The risk that comes from losing our position as the world's most trusted economic leader. For 80 years, since the end of World War II, America has been the anchor of the global financial system. The dollar is the reserve currency. It happened because we kept the rule of law even when it was difficult. It happened because we governed with enough stability and transparency that the rest of the world trusted us with their money. They believed that our system was stable, that our word was good, and that our money was managed wisely. But trust once lost is very hard to rebuild. And we are watching that trust disappear in real time. You can see it already in that 6% decline in foreign treasury purchases. That's not just a number. That is the sound of trust beginning to crack. You can see it in money flows beginning to shift just at the edges toward other currencies and other markets. And you can see it in the conversations, the quiet conversations that are happening in Beijing, in Brussels, in Tokyo, in Riyadh, conversations among finance ministers and central bankers. For years, these conversations were theoretical. What if we diversify away from dollar dependence? What if we create an alternative financial system, a different reserve currency? For decades, these were just academic exercises. Now they are practical. Now they are urgent because the world is watching what is happening in America. They are watching the 500 lawsuits. They are watching the 10% tariff. They are watching the $38 trillion debt projection. And they are watching a court-appointed monitor oversee the business of a sitting president who was found liable for fraud. And they are asking themselves a very simple, very practical question. Can we still count on them? Are they still the safe bet? And when the answer to that question, that basic question that has supported the entire global economy for 80 years, when that answer shifts from absolutely to maybe, well, that is when empires start to fade. It doesn't happen overnight. It's not dramatic like a war or a revolution. It happens gradually. It happens quietly, inevitably, as money, which is just a form of trust, begins to flow elsewhere. It flows to where there is stability. It flows to where there is predictability. And as the money flows, influence follows. And inevitably, as time goes on, our power, our influence in the world, it follows the money right out the door. So, as we move into 2026, the question isn't really about Donald Trump's legal fate or his political future. That's the drama. That's the noise. The real question, the one that will determine our children's and grandchildren's future, is whether America can restore those basic pillars that August 2025 ruling exposed as destroyed. Can we restore trust, stability, and transparency? I am 95 years old. I have bet on America my entire life, and I have done pretty well with that bet. I have always been relentlessly optimistic about this country's long-term future. Our economy is strong. Our people are innovative. Our institutions, I believed, were lasting. They've weathered storms before, but I am also a realist. And the reality right now is concerning. Very, very concerning. That 6% drop in foreign treasury sales is a number I cannot get out of my head. It's a signal that the bet I made, the bet that the world has made on America for 80 years, is being reconsidered. We can turn this around. We still have the resources. We have the talent. We have the institutions if we choose to use them properly, to respect them, to restore them. But the clock is ticking, and every day that passes with this mounting legal chaos, this policy instability, and this money recklessness, that is another day of wearing away confidence. That is another day where the trust, once lost, becomes just a little bit harder to rebuild. I truly hope we get it right. I hope we get it right for all our sakes. Because what's at stake here is not the next election. It's the next 80 years.